Okay. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We're excited to have each and every one of you join us this morning. My name is Godfrey Oji. I'm the project lead at the Sterling One Foundation. And we are, like I mentioned, excited to have each and every one of you join us for this very first edition of the ESG series. So please, for those of us that are already in the room, could we just use the chat box to let us know where we're joining in from? Let's just use the chat box to indicate where we're joining in from. Can everyone confirm they can hear me? Okay, so I see someone. We have Franklin joining in from Lagos. Thank you, Afo from Ghana. Thank you, David from Abuja. Thank you, Solomon from Lagos. Akure, Abuja. Okay. So let's keep the conversation going in the chat room while we get this started. So it's 1 minute past 9. So I'm just going to do a brief intro on the reason why we're here. I'm pretty sure we all know why we're here, but it's still good to give some background before I let our speakers take things from there. So good morning once again, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining. My name is Godfrey, like I mentioned, and I am the project lead at Sterling One Foundation. And today we're really excited to have each and every one of us join us for this first edition of the ESG series, hosted by Sterling One Foundation, along with our partners, the NGX Group, PwC Nigeria, UNIDO-ITPO Nigeria, the Lagos Business School Sustainability Center, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Sterling Bank, and the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association. So last year at our annual convening, the Africa Social Impact Summit, we had more of an ESG roundtable. It wasn't the ESG series. It was an ESG roundtable, and during that session, we noticed, or we discovered that there were a lot of questions. We discovered that there were a lot of things that people, professionals across not just the private sector, but even the development space wanted to know about the ESG, wanted to know how was it different from CSR, how is this different from sustainability, what can I do differently, what are the standards? So there were a lot of questions, and we just thought it wise to take the conversation further, to create a platform that can enable more professionals to come together, to exchange ideas, to improve how the organizations are applying the different standards that exist, and just to get more insights into what ESG is. And that's why we're here today. That's why we're having the ESG series, because we want to help more professionals understand what ESG is all about, help more people understand that this is not just a buzzword, and also help people understand how best they can begin to apply some of the ESG principles that exist. So without taking more time, I am just quickly going to cede the mic to the CEO of the Sterling One Foundation, Mrs. Olapiji Bikwe, to give us some opening remarks and also, take us through a little bit more about why we're here, and then we'll take it from there. So Mr. Olapiji, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. And on behalf of our board and management, I would like to welcome all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen on this call today, joining us from different parts of the world. Please permit me to also sincerely appreciate our partners who have made this ESG series a possibility, starting from the Nigerian Exchange Group, who we've been in conversations with since last year, PricewaterhouseCoopers Nigeria, UNIDO Investment Technology Office. We've also been in conversations with them on this project since last year. The Lagos Business School Sustainability Center, the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, and the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And of course, Sterling Bank. We are very, very grateful for this opportunity to work with amazing partners within the private sector and the development ecosystem to make this a possibility. Like the moderator has mentioned, this is one of the outcomes of last year's Africa Social Impact Summit, where we got feedback from the participants that there was need for more information to be widely shared on the concept of ESG against the backdrop that there was a lot of ignorance on what it meant, the implications for businesses, how businesses could harness the potential of the ESG conversation to be able to increase their investment in their organization and also to manage their risks. So this is going to be a year-long series, and this is the first in it. I would encourage everyone to ensure you stay put and you join us for the other series coming on later in the year. My assignment is to give a brief historical perspective to the concept of ESG. But before I do that, I would like to say a few things about the Sterling One Foundation. The Sterling One Foundation, the organization I'm privileged to represent, is a registered not-for-profit organization in Lagos, Nigeria. We see ourselves as conveners and catalysts on the subject of development. We have our thematic focus areas, which include health, education, food security, gender equality, and climate action. We prioritize galvanizing partnerships for the speedy acceleration of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are so glad to have these amazing partners work with us on this ESG series. Straight to the point, as a background, we're going to look at what's different about ESG and the difference between CSR sustainability and ESG and the evolution of the ESG framework. Starting with about ESG. The term ESG was first coined in the 2000s, and it's a means or a process of quantifying an organization's commitment to social and environmental factors. Today, ESG has evolved significantly. It determines investment decisions in businesses, shapes business strategies, and is actually influencing how we do business across the globe, not just in Nigeria. Across the globe, there are different regulations that have come up to regulate how organizations report on their ESG footprint. And this is a subject that is not necessarily as commonplace in our country and on the continent. And there is no better time than now for us to make this as commonplace as we need it to be. And we go on to the definitions. We have ESG, we have CSR, we have sustainability. What do they mean? What is the difference between these concepts? What is different about what I'm doing? And that's for the professionals in the room. ESG has been defined as a model of investing to use to screen investments based on corporate policies and meant to encourage companies to act responsibly. Please, I must mention here that there are several definitions by different bodies across the globe. But for the purpose of this session, this is the one I'm choosing to share. For corporate social responsibility, it is according to Investopedia now. Corporate social responsibility is a business model that helps a company to be socially accountable to itself, its stakeholders, and the general public. Sustainability, of course, most of us will know that is often defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And what would you say are the major differences, or yes, the comparison points between CSR, ESG, and sustainability? I've heard this so many times. That's why we thought to start with this, defining these concepts. One, when it comes to measures, CSR is more qualitative than quantitative. CSR is more qualitative in its measurements. Sustainability has both quantitative and qualitative measures, while ESG has clear metrics and indicators. ESG is purely quantitative. ESG also is externally regulated. CSR is based on self-regulation. Sustainability mixes both. There's an element of self-regulation. There are also elements of external regulation. ESG, when it comes to business valuation now, ESG is directly related to how businesses are valued, especially for investment decisions purposes. CSR is not directly related to business valuation. Sustainability straddles in between. Finally, when it comes to being measurable, ESG is implemented through measurable goals and audits. CSR, on the other hand, is implemented through corporate culture, values, brand marketing, and management initiatives. And that's where you hear about the concept of cost marketing. While sustainability has a combination of both. Let's take a step back into history. And I must make a disclaimer here. There are so many arguments and conversations that the concept of environmental and social considerations, decision making and investment decisions is something that has been within the African system from time immemorial. But for the purpose of this conversation and this session, the history of ESG as documented, with emphasis on as documented, can be traced back to as far back as 1953, when Howard R. Bowen published the book on social responsibilities of the businessman. This was a time when most business philosophies and motivations were purely based on profit, increasing and maximizing profit for the shareholders and the investors. And then Howard comes with a divergent thinking on social responsibilities of the businessman. Of course, emphasizing the importance of business ethics and social responsibility for all businessmen in his age and his time, which sparked a different conversation for business executives and academics, and of course, the public sector decision makers on different type of considerations and how these business ethics and social responsibility conversations could influence strategic planning and decision making. We now had a lot of activism in the 1960s when there were boycotts due to the Vietnam War, activist movements, and by 1970, we had a US Senator, Gaylord Nelson, actually hold the very, very first ever Earth Day. I know Earth Day is still being celebrated today, when he was able to mobilize about 10% of the country to work, pushing the subject of eco-conversation into the spotlight and bringing more attention to the very risky activities of industrial organizations in those days, increasing public concern over pollution, environmental degradation, and issues around environmental health spurred these conversations and this activism. The 80s and the 90s brought about the Brundtland Commission report, where the Brundtland actually is the name of the chair of that commission. It was actually a report by the World Commission on Environment and Development. And also had various activities by United Nations and the launch of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which today we hold everywhere with the Conference of Parties, right? Speaking to how every government can take responsibility for preserving the global environment. In the 2000, a letter written by the former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, writing to 50 CEOs, encouraging them to join an initiative under the United Nations Global Compact. This initiative launched the Who Cares Wins report. In this report was the very first time that the concept of ESG, as we know it today, environmental, social, and governance, that was the first time that term came into being from the Who Cares Wins report. At the end of this, my presentation, I have the references for those that are interested in doing some more research, and these slides and all the slides presented today will be shared to the boxes of all the participants, because we are really interested in ensuring that everyone knows more and is able to make more value-based decisions in their businesses and integrating CSR and ESG into their businesses going forward. The 2010s can be termed as the formalization era for ESG. Different standards were set up on better reporting for ESG. We had the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board in 2011. Of course, most of us here know that the SDGs came to be in 2015. The GRI standards also was established in 2016. So the 2010s was an era when various standards were birthed that are still positively impacting the subject till today. Of course, the GRI itself was established in the 90s, but the standards was launched in 2016. And this gives us a snapshot from the 1950s to the 2010s. We are here to talk about ESG today. I'm intentionally not going into more details beyond this historical perspective, because we have fantastic speakers in the room. And I must really appreciate and commend our expert panelists, from Dr. Irene Robinson Ayowale to Abimbola Olufore Wycliffe, the head of UNIDO-ITPO Nigeria, to Marilyn that has joined us, the head of ESG Sustainability from the PwC Nigeria. And we also have Eunice Sampson from Ernst and Young. I am really glad to have these wonderful speakers join us today, and I assure you it's going to be an excellent learning time. Why this series? 4 things we're looking to achieve from this series. As you've joined us today, you're also technically a partner on the series. 1, we want to elevate competencies on ESG integration into businesses across Nigeria and across Africa, of course, working with different partners. We're hoping to spur increased investment and long-term profitability for businesses and organizations. And why I say organizations is ESG is also important for not-for-profit organizations. Yes, it is. For organizations within Nigeria and Africa, the entire development ecosystem. We want more knowledge on global standards and adherence with compliance requirements. And finally, we want these conversations to continue with all the participants in the room and beyond the participants in the room for improvement in implementation on this subject across Nigeria and across the continent. The subject of ESG is here to stay. It is not a flash in the pan, and it is evolving very, very fast. Being aware of these trends is key, very, very key to ongoing ownership. Hence this series. Like I mentioned earlier, it will be happening once every 2 months between now and the end of the year. And we're going to be excited to bring to you excellent speakers that will be sharing with us current trends that we need to use in our businesses to ensure we get the most value from the ESG conversation globally, and also we manage our risks properly. At this point, I would like to say thank you so much for your time and hand over to our moderator, Godfrey.
Thanks so much, Mr. Lapiji, for that timeline, for taking us through the journey of ESG up until today. So before I introduce our very first speaker for the day, just a few house rules. So for questions, for people who have questions, please use the Q&A button so that we can check that and respond to your questions in the course of the session. Also, okay, I think we have a first question, so we'll take that much later during the Q&A session. So just keep the questions coming in. We'll respond to as many questions as possible. Now, introducing our first speaker of the day. So our very first speaker of the day is Ms. Abimbola Olufere, whose career spans the private sector, public sector, the international civil service, and she's currently the head of the Investment and Technology Promotion Office here in Nigeria. That's the UNIDO-ITPO, and also covering a few African countries. She has been responsible for coordinating, integrating, and managing day-to-day operations from a 6-year work plan focused on boosting investment, innovation, technology flow in and out of Africa. So with a round of applause, with a virtual round of applause, please let's welcome Ms. Abimbola.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share a short slide presentation on this topic. And I'll put it on slideshow and just run through it and then speak to it at the same time. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I represent the Investment and Technology Promotion Office of UNIDO, which is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And our mandate is the Sustainable Development Goal 9, which looks to sustaining industrialization and the developments and technology required for industrialization is our main focus. So when it comes to ESG, it's actually something that falls well within what we do on a daily basis when we support businesses. And I would go into the slide. It says I should speak to what is ESG, and then just elaborate a bit on it. Mississippi Kwe already spoke to this in her slides, but I'll just reiterate to say that ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and it is actually a framework that is used by different entities to evaluate and measure sustainability, as well as societal impact of a company's operations and practices. More often, a lot of people mix up what ESG is as well as corporate social responsibility. So while corporate social responsibility will look at the acts and activities that a company will decide by itself to do to improve its image amongst its stakeholders, especially for companies that are working in specific communities, the ESG is more encompassing. It's looking at it from, a broader stakeholder perspective, where we're looking at what investors are doing, how is this going to attract, tangible investments? It's looking at pretty much governance risks associated or that companies face, and the social structures around the company's operations. And when we look at this, we're looking at what exactly is the environmental impact of the business or the project that is in consideration. What are the social impacts that this has? And then internally, how is the governance structured? One of the fundamental things when you're looking at ESG is looking at it in terms of what exactly does the future hold for this business as it operates today. Is there, so when you then come to the concept of looking at, businesses through an ESG lens, and what we're trying to see in ESG lensing is the fact that the business is sustainable in terms of future proofing. A lot of times businesses are structured in such a way that they meet immediate needs, but they're also not going with the trend and future forecasts of activities to ensure that that business does not go bust within the next couple of years, where the solution that that business is offering becomes obsolete or irrelevant to the society. You also have the social aspect of it, where when you're looking at the social aspect, you're looking at factors such as its effect on the, apart from, environmental, looking at carbon emissions and all that, the social aspect looks more to the workplace, the workforce as well. What are the labor practices? Is there like diversity involved? Are there plans to be more diverse in operation as compared to what the business is currently doing? What exactly are they working with communities around them? And is there an inclusion factor in this business, as well as the ethical conduct of the business overall? So, and this is very critical for businesses today, because I'll speak to why this matters. And there are increasing concerns and indicators of a company's long-term financial performance and risk management. And most times, in the past, it has often been linked to technical risks or technical, pretty much technical risks. Over time, with companies operating, experts, reviewing or analyzing performance of companies got to realize that a lot of times, more companies are not sustainable because of non-technical risks. And if these non-technical risks are not addressed, then the company may not be viable in the future. So when you start to look at things from an ESG perspective, it matters because you have to look at the long-term, risk management of these companies, which ties into their financial performance as well. So investors are increasingly considering these criteria while making decisions on where to put their money. And there's a whole lot of funding available to businesses that are also looking to sustainability. And this buttresses, the importance of what we do in collaboration with Sterling One Foundation and the other partners on amplifying, the importance of sustainability in all facets of businesses as well as sectors in Nigeria today. Beyond the financial returns, also, we see the societal and environmental concerns, which I mentioned. And this contributes to, at the end of the day, what we want is a more sustainable and equitable world where there is inclusion, where businesses are improving, but it is not at the detriment of the environment or the people. And at the end of the day, there's diversity balance in both gender and, ability and, physically challenged options. We're also looking at this in terms of what will this business be based on operations, based on how it is the composition in the near future. So a lot of things on ESG has to do with future proofing a business, and these are risk mitigants that pose short-term probably pose bigger risks to businesses that they may not be able to exist or they may not be able to compete in the future. So next is the components of this, which is environmental, as I've mentioned, and the social aspects. This has to do with upstream and downstream value chain considerations for suppliers, as well as distributors or off-takers of products or services from businesses. It has to do with communities and, key stakeholders, such as even monitoring bodies, as well as those bodies that are enforcing compliance on ESG. In terms of governance, it refers to just the systems and processes by which the company is directed and controlled, how that is managed, and what is the sustainability factor that is embedded in that corporate governance for the company. When we look at this, stepping back to look at it in terms of a broad ESG framework, we see the components of the environmental. It borders on what we're currently experiencing in terms of energy transition. Would we have enough energy to power up the businesses at the rate at which businesses are growing? What is the energy consumption? Are we factoring in energy conservation? And what are businesses doing to ensure that they are greening the process of even generating and utilizing energy? We look at it from a pollution control perspective, as well as, the general tackling of the climate change effects, and then waste management. We see waste management coming up on environmental as part of the ESG framework, because this is also really critical to the businesses that we do today. There's no process that exists that does not have waste at the end of it. And a lot of times we do these businesses without even factoring in what happens to our waste, if it can be repurposed or recycled or reused, to further create economic empowerment within the society. And so when businesses start to look at this all-encompassing and holistic framework, it helps the businesses to thrive better and even helps them to succeed in areas where they would otherwise not have thought that there were opportunities available to them. Under the social construct, we have human rights. Is everyone happy at work? Is there fairness in the workplace? Are we ensuring that there's no child and forced labor utilized for the businesses? Is the community in which the business is operating, do they have a good welfare? And that probably will tick the boxes of the CSR within that company. And then you're looking at stakeholder health and safety as well. Stakeholder health and safety is really key, especially when it comes to workplace and, employee health and safety. And this is where, of course, NECA is very critical to ensuring that Nigeria implements or enforces a very, very strong ESG framework in our workplaces, so that all these are adhered to, and at the end of the day, we have better workplace, better working systems, and businesses that will thrive, businesses that will morph into industries, and at the end of the day, to bring a socio-economic prosperity for everyone. When then we look at governance, we're looking at the quality of the management, board independence, as well as mitigating conflicts of interest for the entities, and then the diversity of the board. We cannot overemphasize the fact that ESG also ensures that there's gender diversity and gender balance in boards and leadership positions of organizations. It also ensures inclusion of women. And when we're looking at diversity, it's not just about gender, but disability. We're looking at personal preferences of people, and how do we accommodate all these in a world where no one is left behind, where everyone is, moving towards a shared goal of prosperity at the end of the day. So looking at this based on the assignment given to me to just touch on the broad ESG framework under, each of the components, I think I will stop here and cede the floor to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bimbola. So I think we have, thank you so much for that really insightful presentation. So I think we have a question in the Q&A section, and he says, it's from Simon Omo, and he says, is there a difference between ESG and corporate governance? Is there a difference between ESG and corporate governance?
Do you want me to answer that now?
Yes, please. I think we still have some time from your time slot.
So there is a clear difference between ESG and corporate governance in terms of what they cover. And so when you talk about ESG, like I said, this is more from the investor perspective, what they are looking to do. And okay, sorry, I was reading your post. So it encompasses a broader range of factors when you're looking at environmental sustainability, the social responsibility of the company, as well as corporate governance, while CSR primarily focuses on the responsibilities of that company towards the society in which it is operating. And this is often done through activities that are philanthropic in nature, or activities that are, kind of like co-created with the community, but that will benefit that community so that the company itself has a better working environment created for them, but they are also the ones that are catalyzing this environment through the social responsibility. You find this a lot in developing countries where maybe there's lack of infrastructure in the community where a company is operating. Typically, we all know about Shell or the oil producing companies in Nigeria, and the areas in the Niger Delta where they are operating. Pretty much what they do in terms of building of schools, hospitals, roads, and provision of electricity to those communities are activities that are CSR activities. They are just helping to create a better working environment so that their operations will not be deterred through any unexpected risks that would constitute like a force majeure and stuff like that. When it comes to ESG, ESG is looking at things in terms of how a company manages its envisaged risks, especially looking at it from a future of that entity's perspective. How will the company survive in the next 2 years? What are the plans, in place? They have to also report, on this. How are they greening their processes? How are they working towards the sustainability of the services that they offer and their own internal operations? How is this, sustainable? So there are additionalities based on the metrics that are set, or a range of factors that are set to measure this. And it is not the company that assesses itself. For CSR, the company can assess itself and give itself a pass mark. But for ESG, that assessment is done by a monitoring body and compliance is required.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bimbola. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bimbola, for that very insightful response. And from the chat box, we can see that a lot of people enjoyed that session. So just to answer a few of the questions that I am seeing in the chat box, there are a number of people asking if there is going to be a certificate of participation. Yes, there will be a certificate of participation. So we encourage everyone to stick around to the end. We have 3 more very insightful speakers. So Mr. Bimbola, we still have about 5 minutes from your time slot. So we have another question here from Alexander. And he says, in your experience, what has been the biggest challenge in integrating key ESG factors in the current SME business environment in Nigeria, with emphasis on non-oil and gas companies? So I know that's a handful, so I'll just shorten that. So what has been the biggest challenge in integrating ESG factors in the SME environment for non-oil and gas companies?
Okay, so pretty much for when you look at it in non-oil and gas companies, a lot of times for the sustainability of SMEs, one of the key challenges for SMEs has been, the structure that currently exists on how they access funding. And you even find SME companies that are looking to more sustainable solutions as business offerings, not even getting this funding. So understanding what the ESG factors are in the first place is key. And I think awareness amongst SMEs as well in terms of ESG compliance is also key. Because when it comes to ESG, today, we think that ESG is the responsibility of just big firms, but ESG is the responsibility of everyone. So first, one of the most critical things is helping SMEs to understand the importance of this ESG. And when you look at it from a zero oil perspective, I would want I don't know why that phrase was utilized, but I think that it cuts across, right? Because when you look at the metrics that are utilized for ESG measurements, it's easier. They are standardized metrics between companies, and you can take those metrics based on the general framework for ESGs and see whether you are meeting them. Also, I think it's a vantage opportunity for any SME today to take on the ESG framework for the sector in which they operate and see whether they meet them, because I believe that even in trying to raise your standards to meet the ESG requirements, you would also be probably pivoting or improving your service offering in a way that you would now also be attractive to investments that are looking to businesses that are focused on sustainability and future planning for their businesses. I hope that clarifies.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Mbimbola. Just one more question. I think we have 3 more minutes. So someone says ESG strategy implementation is gradually becoming an organizational goal for businesses in Nigeria, considering the fact that these metrics are becoming a requirement for investors. But small businesses and SMEs, how do they encourage ESG strategy implementation? How can small businesses be encouraged, or how can they make their ESG implementation better?
So this has to be similar to the previous question, and it has to be with, quickly building capacity amongst SMEs on ESG reporting and ESG disclosures that are required, and helping them to understand this, helping them to understand exactly what are the ESG global trends, especially, and also the domestic ESG trends. So looking at things from the perspective of awareness, on issues such as sustainability, such as climate change for SMEs has become critical. We see that, in a lot of countries for SMEs, there's been a growth in ESG investments, and ESG assets right now are valued at about 35 trillion. And this is as at probably 4 years ago. And so there's a big opportunity to tap into ESG assets, because these investments would look at what you're doing to address climate change. What are your sustainability what are your sustainability plans for your business? And then we know that currently, like in Nigeria or Africa generally, we have an issue with standardization in reporting. You can start to report as is while I think for us, our responsibility is to also push for standardizations in reporting, because you need to report on key issues around carbon emissions, climate impact, human rights. So when you look at your business, albeit small, how is it contributing to emission reduction? How is it balancing, acts when it comes to human rights in terms of how you're employing or the services that you're giving, how is this contributing to a human rights, balance? And also, when you look at greening of processes, for example, and managing your waste, how are you doing this? So when you have this, it helps a lot. Currently, we have inconsistencies in the standards, but the more we drive for a standardization of the reporting, the better it is for SMEs. And probably maybe for SMEs, we can also push to have a set of standards for SMEs as a first level compliance and minimum I would say like a minimum criteria for ESG for SMEs. And I see, that for us that are sitting across, this virtual table today, it's something that we can discuss to say, can we even push this so that SMEs can also start to get, onto this train of ESG reporting and ESG compliance? But I really, really appreciate this question because it has pushed, I think it will birth, a new initiative where we then start to focus specifically on SMEs and see how we can drive compliance, at the first level of compliance ahead of other things, while we also push, for standardization across board in the government, within the bodies that are supposed to be driving this compliance. Thank you.
Awesome, really awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the elaboration. Thank you so much for your presentation. Once again, can we just give Mr. Bimbola a round of applause? Just a virtual round of applause. Okay, so while we're doing that, I'm quickly going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is the head of ESG, sustainability, and climate change at PwC Nigeria. She has over 15 years of experience spanning business development, sustainable finance services, decarbonization services, sustainability and integrated reporting, sustainability assurance, impact assessment, stakeholder engagement, innovation for sustainability, UN integration and implementation, ESG integration. She is a board member of the panel of experts for adaptation of the benefits mechanism on climate change related matters for a DFI. I am speaking about no other person than Ms. Marilyn Obaisa Oswala. Please, let's put our hands together as we welcome her.
Thank you, everyone. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll just put up my presentation. We've been told, I was told that I needed to talk about ESG and the business case. And the first thing that crossed my mind was, well, that's what everyone on this call is actually doing, trying to make us understand the business case for ESG. Apologies, I'm trying to get my deck on. I don't see why it's not highlighted. Please hold on for me. Okay. Okay, I get it now. Thank you. Confirm you can see my deck.
How's mine?
I think it's coming up. We can't see it yet,
Okay.
but it's coming up.
Yeah, I don't know why it's I put it up, I had to put it down again. Do I have the permit? Is it coming up?
Not yet, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Okay, I'll start. I really can't put my finger on why the deck isn't coming on. I can tell why. Okay.
I will try to share from my end, but you can go ahead with the session. Yes.
Is it
We
up
can
now?
see your screen. Yes, awesome.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you. Okay, I think I needed to just clear some security stuff. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm happy to be in your midst. I was there last year, and it was an exciting time establishing, an understanding across all stakeholders on ESG. So my task here, I think for me, is trying to build a business case, or establishing a business case for ESG. I also feel that what all of us have been saying right from the history, very interesting history that Madam Kejo had given on ESG and how it came to be, all the way to the presentation that the previous speaker had given on understanding ESG. So I just have one question for the room. What do you want to understand about ESG?
So hi, everyone. So we can just use the chat box to share some of our insights. So we have Ibukun from Babagona who says he wants to understand everything, that he wants to understand everything.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, you're back, Marilyn. So we have someone who says they want to understand the business case for SMEs. We have another person who says they want to understand how NGOs can incorporate ESG in their operations.
Okay.
Metrics to measure for ESG in the workplace. If ESG is really a priority in the third world countries. How to encourage ESG implementation, utilizing national regulatory agencies and bodies, the overall impact. So we have quite
quite a lot.
diverse.
So thank you.
Yes.
So I just wanted to feel the pulse in the room. So these are our learning objectives. Of course, we'll be sharing the deck, but let me quickly go into that quick, very important aspect of building a business case for this ESG, and that's to demystify ESG. And I will start with this slide. If you look at the slide to your right, you'll see where we say ESG is just a passing trend. I'm sure from the conversation so far, it's not. But what exactly is it? I mean, some of the comments that you've made in the chat room is asking, what does this mean? How does this mean to my business? Is it progressive? Is it for me? Is it material? Why this? So a lot of those questions. Is it about greenwashing or donation? So when you talk about greenwashing means just saying I did X, Y, Z, color it, more than it's supposed to be. Oh, we went and we bought 14 classrooms over into the private sector. We painted it, and when we go there, it was not really a strategic move. It was more like a show off. Or we said we did something that we didn't do. So most of these things sit under greenwashing, to say it in the basic terms. Or donations. I mean, our previous speakers tried to explain to us the interrelationship between CSR and other. Oh, we donated XYZ. Is it about that? It's not. It's too expensive to practice. I've noticed that a lot of people in the room are spoken about SMEs and saying, oh, we are SMEs, small, medium enterprise. It's an expensive thing. Is it something that's for us? I've heard a lot of people in my practice say it's expensive to practice. Is it true? No. That's because most people have looked at ESG from a particular perspective. The perspective has trickled down from global. We're not looking at it in the context of what's material to my business, from the perspective of business growth, from the perspective of economic growth, from the perspective of opportunities, some of which the earlier speaker, brought up in her conversation. Is it an imported concept? No, it is what we are all clamoring for. It is one of the reasons I always, when I'm talking to Gen Z, I say one of the reasons you're actually jackpine and leaving the country is because of our non-ESG consciousness. We want a good environment. We want an environment that is healthy for ourselves and our children. We want a socially inclusive environment where you think about the social aspect of our lives. We want good governance. So this is not an imported concept. It is a concept that everyone actually secretly in their heart in one way or the other require. It is a practice for developed nation. Absolutely not. It is supposed to be a practice for everyone who seeks sustainable development. The earlier speaker, again, leveraging on what she said, kept talking about future proving, I don't think there's any business here who doesn't want to exist in the next two years or next 3 years or next 5 years for issues that are, that are actually very glaring to you, but you have not taken time to look at it in that perspective of ESG. Is it true that ESG goals are not achievable? No, they are achievable because there's something called materiality, in which we're saying set smart goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, you can rely on them, and they are time bound. Is it true that it's only big organizations that can practice ESG? Absolutely not. Even in your homes, you're already practicing ESG. And my aim for today is to make you understand that you're doing it, to see how it's applicable, and to see how it's pushing for growth. I don't want to belabor my conversation around, the concepts around sustainability. I think that has really been spoken about. But what I wanted to know is that sustainability is a big, big concept. While it is simply put as meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow, you will understand that the next question that comes to your mind is, how do I know I'm doing that? How do I know I'm measuring that? And an earlier speaker has been able to tell us that this is why the concept of ESG actually came in simple terms. It's a way to measure. If I ask anyone in the room today to say, how do you know that Nigeria is economically growing? All of us will talk about GDP, most likely in terms of economic measurements, things that are, you can measure in the economic terms. If I ask you, how do you know your company is growing? Most of you will say, oh, we are very profitable. We grew our profits by so, or our cash flows are very healthy, or our forex is so healthy because we export and import and business is doing well. So things like that, you used to say, this is for me growth. But what ESG is telling you that your growth is actually much more bigger than that, especially as the globalization of the world has matured. So you're looking at the things around environment, social, governance. I need to establish that so that as I go into the business case, it's very clear. Social, and governance. And these three areas became very evident with the advent of the climate change issue. I don't think there's anyone in this room that has not experienced climate change. Hello.
Hi, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear, but it appears your slides are not moving.
I've not moved it. I'm still talking.
Oh, okay, awesome.
What slide are you seeing? Sustainability at a glance?
No, we're seeing demystifying ESG.
Okay, so I have a network issue. So has it moved now?
It hasn't moved yet.
Okay. All right. I'm going to upload it again so that you can see it. Okay. Please confirm you can see sustainability at a glance.
Yes, we can. If you could also put this on slideshows so that it's more legible. So
Is it on slideshow now?
Not yet.
Okay, I think I'm getting a lag. That's the issue. Okay. It's actually a slideshow on my end. I apologize for this. I don't know why that is. I think I'm getting a lag from where I am. Okay. All right. So let me continue and let me know if I didn't need to go back. So when you talk about the climate change issue, and that's just very simple, which is naturally, when we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. The plants, they take it in, the carbon dioxide a lot, and many of some other gases are, naturalized, within the natural ecosystem. But with our activities, we've cut down the natural cost of getting these gases sorted naturally. And so they are abundant in the air, they trap the sun, and then there's global warming, and then there's a lot of catastrophe. We are all experiencing it in various ways. But it's easy for you to relate with this when we talk about the agricultural sector. So, okay, I understand the agricultural sector with this. But when we talk about energy and the financial sector, that is when it makes sense to all of us. One of the greatest cause of these emissions that the earlier speaker spoke about is the kind of energy that we use. And also for us to understand that the financial sector is also increasingly imbibing performance around the E, S, and G. So just to make a case, I'll go. Can you see my slide moving? I'm just worried about that.
It's not moving, so I'm going to try to take over that from my own end and see if that's going to help.
Okay, thanks. You want me to send you the slide, or you can pick it up from here?
If you can share that would be great.
Okay, I apologize because I don't know why this is happening. Okay. Okay, done. Please confirm if you received it.
Just a minute, please. So currently you have ESG and SDGs, the nexus, on the screen.
Yes,
so I think
it's just slow. Do you want us to be patient about it, or how do we do it?
So we'll switch, but I'm saying just keep speaking to this while I
okay.
take over in like a minute or two.
Okay, thank you for that. All right. Okay. We've usually heard of the concept of ESG, and we've heard of SDGs. Is there a nexus? Yes. And one of those important things that we need to note is that with the SDGs, it makes more sense to everyone. While that is looked at more from the why SDGs are looked at more from macroeconomic level, by which our governments, for example, are looking at no more poverty, SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, things like around this concept, where most of the NGOs in the room will understand very clearly, because some of your mandates are built around maybe the 17 SDGs, and some of the private sector entities as well align to these SDGs. You would then begin to see that if you look at these, you'll see that there's a nexus between that. You will look at some of the, like about 8 of the SDGs fall under the environmental pillar, another chunk fall under social, another about 8 fall under the governance pillar. So whether you're looking at it from the government side, and by government I mean our nationals and subnationals and regional, or we're looking at it from the microeconomic perspective in terms of your organizations, whether big, small corporates, all SMEs, or even micro companies, it all speaks to all of us. And whether you're even looking at it from the perspective of NGOs, it speaks to all of us. But what then do we need to do? I know that question is always comes up very importantly. So I will go to my slide 11. I'm trying to not take care of this slide issue plus the timing. I hope I can be heard, and please let me know if you have the slides now. You can project for me. Okay. If you look at a few material topics, so I'll give you practical examples. If you're an NGO, for example, and your core mandate is to ensure that there's clean water available across XYZ area, I'll give an example with NGO and a corporate. You will agree with me that when you look at your ES and G, you're going to ask yourself, what exactly is material to my business growth, and what is material to me as a business? What are the impacts I'm creating doing my business to the external world? So it's both ways. How does this external world impact my business, and how does my own business impact the external world in terms of environment, social, and governance? That's the simple way to look at it. So some people, your business is heavily disturbing the air quality, noise pollution, whatever the case may be. So you know that's really material for you. And then you tweak it again and say, if my business, what keeps my business? What are the risks and opportunities that keeps my business within ES and G, or can make my business stop running? It's a lot of thinking to do. And then you begin to realize there's a relationship, that relationship. And then increasingly so, it's actually tied to your finances. I'll give you an example. For a corporate, for example, within the Nasarawa plain where there was flood in Nigeria, as simple as that particular risk is, it affected social. Some people must have lost their lives. Some people must have lost their jobs. It affected the banks. Those banks who are giving those companies that had those farms money, affected the insurance company. There were legal issues because, of course, the explanation of what force majeure is. So many things around that area. I got a nod. Is that for me? Can you
Hi,
see
Marilyn,
me?
please.
Yeah.
Yes,
you have the slides
we can
now?
still see you. I do.
Okay.
It's going to be coming up in a minute.
Okay. So do I take a pause? Because I think it's important people see the slides while I talk.
No, please go ahead. We can see your slides. It's not just on slideshow, but I'll fix that in a minute.
Okay. So I'm just going to go straight into the key drivers for sustainability in Africa. Having established what sustainability means, knowing that it is bigger, it's a lot bigger than what we see, and we all understand that we're a part of it. We've talked about the SDGs. We've talked about why the ESG being a matrix to expand your thinking of sustainability. I just go into the drivers, and then I'll go to my second to the last slides for time and for the interruptions. I apologize. Now, if you look at the drivers for Africa, you will see that we are looking at robust risk management. It's readily very important. Climate change is affecting so many issues. It's affecting our finance. It's affecting. It could be systemic. It will be transition risk that Nigeria really is facing at the moment. There's a heavy call to diversify our energy sector. So in the next few years, the competition for energy will be huge. So there's blue hydrogen, there's green hydrogen competing for hydrogen for energy, the energy customer. There's solar, which most of us have already even gone to, out of need, not even out of thinking of ESG, but out of need. There's biomass. So these things come with their risk, especially when it comes to transitioning, and it has impact on businesses. So are you in that business value chain? Are you in that business supply chain that these emerging issues would either affect as a business growth or affect as an opportunity for you to expand your business or to diversify? Then we have the regulatory compliance. I think the next speaker will speak about that a lot. There's a lot of emerging standards and regulatory bodies standardizing these. Litigal issues, this is emerging as well as a driver of ESG. So I'm sure some of us have seen some of the new caption on the news on some brands, people calling out brands right now in terms of, social issues, whether it's child labor, whether it's quality of products and things like that. And of course, with this litigation, I mean, any accountant in the room will tell you with litigation, your going concern is beginning to shake. So you need to begin to look at these things, this risk in a more elaborate manner. Then brand value, you can create, and this goes to a lot of the NGOs in the room and probably other corporates, you can create brand value from focusing through the lens of ESG. Social license to operate as well, very important driver for sustainability. So if you're trying to expand your business, I'll give you examples like when we had the NSAS, some banks along the corridor of Admiralty Road in Lekki, Lagos, were not touched. And some people decided to just do a search. Why didn't this happen? It was discovered that the stakeholder engagement of some of those banks or companies that were not touched was very, very perfect because they identified their stakeholders well. And so they were protected, from damage and things like that. So things around that are the things that ESG is telling you to begin to look at. Then sustainable finance. I think I would tell Sterling One to just pick sustainable finance as a big topic and really speak to it, because I think this will speak to our needs as in the government, driving FDIs, to speak to the banks who are presently looking for capital base. It will speak to SMEs who are also looking for sustainable finance, patient finance, looking for blended finance, as the case may be. These are opportunities that are driving ESG. And other countries are maximizing this more than we are. And what does it take? It just takes us being responsible on that side. I will then quickly go, because of time, and I apologize, I think this happened because of the slide issue, to how do we measure? There are standards, loads of standards according to I have to look at the history of standards that are coming. But now, the interesting thing is that we then have new standards to report our ESG performances. And this standard is from the IFRS, ISSB S1 and S2. I think the next speaker would talk about that really deeply. So just know that there's that these standards exist for reporting. We also have, moving from global to local, we have the Nigerian Climate Change Act that is driving all the ESG conversations in Nigeria as well. And if you can look to my right, if unfortunately my slide is not on slideshow, you would see what has happened recently. There's a recent blueprint that had been, announced, the 2.5 billion carbon market, and the country is beginning to see the need for that. Recently, our president has been talking about solid minerals that supports transitioning. So we have lithium, we have quite a lot of things that Nigeria, can diversify into. This is the last slide I want to spend my time on, and then I will close for the day. In our world today, if you look at this slide, it just speaks to everything ESG is telling you as a business case. One is redefining what business resilience is and business continuity. And so you need to begin to look at this as an organization, whether small, big. It looks at you from your scale, whether you're operating on a large, small scale, or you're operating as a government entity or as a private entity. Your resilience is very important. Competitive edge. People have built brand value from this. It's boosting investment, FDIs coming in as in the bracket of the new finance called sustainable finance. Impact and value creation. So we are redefining social corporate responsibility within the umbrella of sustainability, where you're more strategic. You're able to tell the impact you're doing, whether it's direct, indirect, induced impact. You're able to create value. The SMEs in the room, you are key value drivers, because you are the world global supply chain. What value are you driving? Are you able to interpret this into a risk and an opportunity for you in the global space and even in the local space? There's a lot to this, I said, but just having that understanding now is very important. Redefining going concern. The accountants in the room, your going concern stops at, okay, we have reported this year profits, cash flows, and all that. But this is really shaking your going concern, asking you now to report your real risk in terms of E and S and G that is not really considered in the normal financial reporting. And then responsible resource management. You heard me talk about us having that resources and how we are managing that. Innovation, innovation, innovation. With innovation, things change. I always talk about the Nokia effect, or the BlackBerry effect, where you feel that you are in one particular this thing can't change. A lot of people tell me that about ESG. No, it's going to die off. So one person can innovate something that to make it the go-to, and we can see that already in some of the innovations we are seeing: electric cars, the greening of the economy, the blue economy, as the case may be. Capacity building, very important. You can't learn about ESG in just 30 minutes or 2-hour session. So please be a part of this series so that you'll be able to harness your risk and opportunities and apply this in your organization. We need board buy-in, and we also need the government goodwill. I think this government is beginning to show some goodwill in that direction with some of the news that has been coming out. So there are opportunities in our alternative economy that ESG pushes, which is the green economy. There are risks and opportunities and great opportunities there that we need to harness. There's blue economy. I talked about blue hydrogen recently. So if you're in the oil and gas, it's time for you to start talking to your board. How are we thinking about our future? The circular economy in terms of waste, as the case may be. Please confirm you can see my screen still.
Yes, we can. I've been sharing your slides for quite a while now, so.
Okay.
We can
then you look at strategy, risk management, and all that. Over and above, please understand that ESG drives collaboration. It's no longer a one person's duty. Finance managers have to speak to their sustainability managers, their risk managers, internal auditors, inter-ministry departments and agencies for business growth, economic growth, social development, and it should not just be for complying to trends, but for driving opportunities and value in our society. With this, I'll take a stop because of time, so I'll take questions. If any of your questions come within the slides that I couldn't present, I'll present it and answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. We really appreciate the insights that you've shared. Thank you for demystifying ESG. That was really key for us. So apologies to everyone for the issues, for technical issues that we had. So we'll just be able to take about 1 or 2 questions. And the first one is from Caroline Solanke, and she says, what is sustainable finance? In line with ESG, does this border on ethical investments?
Okay. Do you want me to answer immediately, or you want to ask all the questions first? Or I should answer immediately?
Yeah, I think we can take that depending on how much time we have left after your response.
Okay, so sustainable finance is a simple or a gradual, drift from the natural, traditional finance that you know about. What sustainable finance is requiring is to see performance beyond economic returns on investment. So you want to see what are your performance in terms of environment, what are your performance in terms of social, what are your performance in terms of governance. And so we have a lot of financing instruments that speaks to this. So we have things like sustainability related linked bonds. We have green bonds, we have social bonds, we have blended finance that mixes both together. We also have green loans. I'll give you an example of a green loan. So for example, I mean, if you look at the news, the World Bank is about to give us loans for solar. I don't know where that is. Well, then it's trickled down to you. It's a green loan because you're trying to get loans for your solar panels, for example. So a lot of these finances is coming in, but strictly to drive environment, social, and governance performance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that very short and still insightful answer. I think we can take one more question. And the participant says, how do we measure ESG metrics? Is there a defined template, or do we just determine do I determine what I want to measure?
Okay, thank you. I like that question a lot. First of all, no templates. I'm totally against templates because it's beyond those templates that we're used to in terms of IFRS, but what it tells you right now is to say, you ask yourself critical questions around your ESG. What are the risks? What are the opportunities? There are supporting standards that would help with that. The GRI standards, the present ISSB S1 and S2, which encompasses a lot of standards that can support you. Like I said, that's another discussion for another day. In those standards, you begin to see metrics, clear metrics on how to measure. So there's the GHG protocol, there's the PCAF, there's a lot. There are a lot of taxonomies coming up. So please stay tuned to this ESG series as we unpack these things for you so that you will learn more. And please also upskill yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marilyn. You've actually done a bit of my work by just encouraging everyone to stay tuned. We have so much more. So once again, can we just put our hands together for Marilyn? And once again, apologies to, yes.
Yeah.
Apologies to our audience that we couldn't get all the insights that Marilyn had to share because of some technical issues.
I'm so sorry. And I'm in the capital city. I'm in the capital city, so I don't know what's going on with your internet, but it's all well. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned earlier, the recording of this session is going to be shared to everyone, so would have the opportunity to catch up on whatever we missed earlier. Now we're going to move to our next speaker. And our next speaker is the erstwhile Divisional Head, Business Support Services and General Counsel at the Nigerian Exchange Limited, which is a leading multi-asset listing and trading exchange in Africa. In 2023, she received an honorary degree of law, an honorary Doctor of Law degree from the École Supérieure Université. I'm not so sure if I got that correctly. But in 2022, she was selected by the World Federation of Exchanges, one of the 21 women leaders of 2022, and was also named the General Counsel of the Year at the 2021 and 2022 Nigerian Legal Awards. Now, we might be wondering why we have someone who is very vast in legal, and she's here to speak to us about regulators and other stakeholders within the ESG space. With a round of applause, please let's welcome Dr. Irene Robinson. Hi, Dr. Irene.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning to everyone. Nice to be part of this webinar. And in fact, I must commend every one of the speakers who have gone before me because they have done a fantastic job just in terms of preparing the stage for this presentation. Now, can you see the screen? Hello, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Yes, we can see
you. Okay, that's good. Fantastic. So in this presentation, I would be focusing on the regulatory challenges with ESG and sustainability reporting, the global and local regulatory initiatives around sustainability reporting and ESG reporting and regulatory expectations. Now, there's been a lot of questions that have been asked around, the role for SMEs. Is this an imported concept? Standardization? How do we understand what ESG means and how do we apply it to our respective entities? Hopefully, as we go through this, we'll be able to discuss and touch some of those areas in detail. Now, I want to focus on sustainability reporting and the purpose behind sustainability reporting. We've heard terms like future proofing. I like to talk about accountable capitalism and building to last. And the whole essence of introducing mandatory sustainability reporting globally, and we'll see that it's a trend that has begun to catch on all over the globe now, is because companies, countries, economies have recognized the fact that if we want the economy and our business and our entities to last the test of time, then we must introduce mechanisms in place to deal with sustainability reporting, ensuring that each entity is reporting along certain recognized ways of reporting, measurements, metrics, standards, and things like that. So what's emerging in the globe right now? A lot of things around consolidation of standards. So a lot of the standard setters are emerging now. We've heard about GRI, we've heard about a lot of other, and I'll touch on them as I go on in this presentation. There's a lot of consolidation and merger that's happening across various standard setters. Now, new regulation is also being introduced that's focusing on getting companies and entities to now have mandatory type of disclosures. regarding what they are doing around ESG. In Nigeria, we have not, I would say that we have done reasonably well as a country, because a lot of companies, a lot of entities, even before these mandatory legislations were introduced, had already begun to introduce certain disclosures which were voluntary on their part, and we'll go into some of them now. Now, what are some of the regulatory challenges that has led to this change in global direction regarding sustainability reporting and making it mandatory? I saw somebody in the chat box indicating that, is it voluntary now? It seems to be voluntary. Yes, and this are the kind of challenges that arose as a result of the voluntary landscape. We were having regulatory fragmentation. We had a lack of standardization. We had different types of disclosures going about various companies, depending on the type of standards that those companies or entities were applying. We had a lot of greenwashing going on, because before now, there was no assurance type of requirements concerning the kind of information that entities were pushing out in terms of their ESG implementation and practices, even the types of data quality and reliability in terms of how are you gathering this data, how are you reporting this data, what are the types of metrics you should be pushing forward, what are you tracking. All of those things were there, and we had challenges in this area. And clearly, because there wasn't a mandatory regulation, there were issues around how government entities themselves could recognize it and implement and enforce it across companies and entities. So in terms of lack of standardization, I mean, some of the issues have been raised here: complexity in metrics. And part of that complexity in metrics is even, first of all, understanding what is ESG? What does ESG mean to me as a business? What is my materiality? How do I determine my materiality and the double materiality in terms of the issues that pertain to me? How do I even measure, if in terms of my carbon emissions, how am I measuring? How am I verifying? How am I assessing? All of those things were there, and these are part of the issues that lack of standardization brought. Also in terms of investors, because a lot of investors were investing in various companies, but the challenge is that some companies were applying GRI, some were applying CDP, some were applying TCFD, and so there was just a challenge with investors being able to look at companies within the same sector and say, okay, this is the type of ESG metrics and measurements that I'm going to look at companies within this sector. It doesn't mean that the issues that they are dealing with are the same, but in terms of how they are reporting it, and we'll see that gradually, it has to be similar. Also, in terms of, I talked about the emerging trends, the fact that, yes, even from Mrs. Ibekwe had already indicated that GRI was one of the early sets of standards, and the SASB were some of the early sets of standards that were launched. But even after that, different standards kept on emerging, and the issue was, which standards do entities go with? Some would adopt GRI, some would adopt SASB. Yes, there were some certain similarities, but there were also some certain differences, and these were causing a lot of issues in terms of tracking of how companies were performing in terms of ESG. And all of these things also affected the cost itself of implementation. And I know one of the questions that have been raised is around the cost of implementation, especially for SMEs. How do we expect an SME to be able to understand GRI, to be able to pay for some of the advice and consultancy services that might be needed to apply a GRI or a SASB? These were some of the issues that were prevalent. Regulatory capacity, I talked about it. The fact that, first of all, if there's no regulation in place that is mandatory for companies to follow, how then would regulators themselves be able to track the implementation and the compliance of those things? Would regulators really want to invest the type of money needed in terms of training, capacity building, things like that, to ensure that they're actually tracking
Hi, Dr. Irene. So we can no longer hear you. I think you're muted. Please, can you try unmuting?
Okay, can you see me? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, but I think we can no longer see your slides.
Yes. So let me try and reshare.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, did you do something? It seems I can't share again.
Wow. Apologies
Hello?
about that. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, can you do something to give me back? Sorry about that. So what I can do is to try and rejoin, and hopefully that would help to allow me to share the screen.
Okay, apologies about that. Okay, so while we wait for Dr. Irene to rejoin, so just a few house rules. For those of us that have questions and can't use the Q&A button, you can just drop your questions in the chat box and we'll respond to that as well. I've seen some questions around the recording and the slides. I already mentioned that that would be shared at the end of the session. So we'll all be getting that at the end of the session. And this is would also be receiving a certificate of participation. So we should all expect that at the end of the session.
Great. So I have
Irene.
back, yes, sorry about that. I have back the authority, so I will be able to continue sharing.
Awesome.
So is this good? Can you see? Is it back?
Yes, we can see your screen, but you're sharing the meeting, the webinar screen. So if you could just switch to your slides.
Okay. Let me switch.
Hi, Dr. Irene. Hi, Dr. Irene. If you're speaking, you're still muted.
Hello, can you hear me? So sorry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to email you right now the slides. I don't know why it's not. So I'm going to email you now the slides so that you can have the slides.
Okay, that works too.
The beauty about technology. So once I email you the slides, I will continue speaking so that we will save some time.
Okay. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, I think while we're waiting for that, I think we can just share some new insights. So maybe we can just have a little bit of an interaction in the chat box. So maybe the participants can just share one new thing they've learned. I know there have been a number of different conversations, different angles that ESG has been taken from today. So if some of the participants can just share, it doesn't have to be more, just one thing, one new thing that you've learned or that you didn't know before coming into this webinar. So if you could just share that in the chat box so that we can keep the conversation going. So one new thing that you've learned, it could be around metrics, it could be around maybe a new standard of measurement that you've learned. It could be about the difference between governance and corporate governance. So let's do that in the chat box.
Okay, so I've sent you the slides.
Awesome. So I think you can continue speaking. So we have a couple of
yes,
people
so, yes, sincere apologies for that. So I'll continue speaking. So I was talking about the regulatory challenges, and I talked about the issue around enforcement and the fact that various countries were introducing various types of ESG reporting, metrics, measurements across the globe. And remember that various companies are part of the value chain of some of these international companies. So you might be part of the value chain. And when we talk about value chain, it could be in terms of being someone that is selling that product in country, or you're one of those that sends in resources that are needed for those companies to produce their products globally. So you are part of that supply chain. And as a result of that, you might be part of the supply chain of a company that is in the US, that is also operating in the EU. You might be part of another company that is in the EU, in Asia, and things like that. And so you have those various companies maybe applying different types of standards and also subject to different types of jurisdictions. And here you are as part of a supply chain to various companies having to comply and provide information that cuts across those various standards and those various legislations. Those were part of the issues that companies were facing, even in terms of greenwashing, to some of the things that people have talked about. Now, you would notice that some companies, especially here in Nigeria, produced sustainability reports, which were not part of their audited financial accounts, but were reports around things that they were doing in terms of the E, the S, and the G. Now, those reports, even not just within Nigeria, but even globally, did not need to be audited or to have some form of assurance provided to those reports. And so as a result of that, you had situations in which some companies may be exaggerating or misrepresenting some of the things they were doing around the ESG space. Then I talked about data collection. How then do you verify that, in fact, that information and the proof that a company is saying this is the basis and the proof upon which I am saying I'm doing this in the ESG space? How are we sure that that proof is credible, it's recognized, it's viable, it can stand the test of time? And so there were issues around even the type of data that companies were providing across board. Some companies in certain sectors with respect to certain areas will provide data in a certain way, and the same companies operating within that same sector will provide data in other ways. And so all of this were causing a lot of concerns around the reliability of the information that companies were providing. It was also affecting the efficiency with which global trade could happen across jurisdictions. And clearly it was also affecting investments in terms of investors being able to be sure that their investments were being made based on the right and credible information. And so these were the regulatory challenges that we were facing under this multi-standards regime. Have you got my slides now? So, because I'm moving now to looking at the global landscape in terms of the ESG reporting and the frameworks itself. So, Godfrey, do you have my slides now?
Not yet, ma, but that would be up in a few minutes.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of the frameworks, I just want to send it again so that I'm sure you have it. So I've just sent it again to you, to your mail this time. So hopefully you should have it now. So in terms of the various frameworks that you have, you find out that, first of all, the global reporting landscape in terms of ESG was made up of, first of all, you would have the global goals. And the speaker before me has talked about some of those goals. First of all, the Paris Agreement, the sustainability SDG goals. So those are the bedrock upon which the global regulatory landscape for ESG started. And that's the baseline, and it's still applicable today, even with the various regulations and frameworks that have been introduced, because that is the bedrock and the basis upon which each of these frameworks were built on. So you have the sustainability development goals, you have the Paris Agreement, you have the principles for responsible investments, you have the greenhouse gas protocol. So all of these laid down the goals and objectives and standard blueprints that, whether as a country or as entities or as investors, these were the blueprints upon which various organizations were hoping to comply and apply and implement. Now, on top of those global framework, oh great, you now have it. So I'm on the global ESG landscape framework. Yes. So yes, so I am here. So this pyramid is very, very important. So you can see that the foundation, the bottom, the Paris Agreement, the principles on responsible investments, the greenhouse gas protocols, the SDG goals. These form the basis of the standard goals around E, S, and G that give the principles that countries, entities want to adhere to and implement. And by implementing this, you are sure that you would be building something to last and something that is sustainable, and that indeed you are operating within the accountable capitalism framework. But having said that, these are just goals and objectives. It doesn't necessarily give the basis, or it does not teach companies or entities how they can apply each of these principles and goals in order to implement them within their operations, their activities, and things like that. So off the back of this, we now have various frameworks that came about. So you have the GRI standards, you have the CDSB standards, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, you have the Task Force on Climate, you have the Value Reporting Foundation. So the SASB, the integrated reporting. I'm sure even just staring at this, you can see that it's quite a mouthful and it's quite an eyeful. And these are just some of the various sustainability or ESG related frameworks that arose off the back of these various global goals that you see here. And so what happened is that there were a lot of companies. Some companies would decide to go with GRI, some would decide to go with TCFD, some would decide to go with CDSB, some might decide and focus on climate, some might, because they are focusing on climate, they are just focused. They might decide and say, okay, I'm going to apply TCFD, I'm going to apply CDP, or I'm going to apply CDSB. If you want to be more broad looking in terms of what you are doing, you could decide that, okay, I'm going to apply SASB, I'm going to apply GRI. And so there were these various frameworks. And so you can imagine the predicament for investors and even for those that were trying to understand the operations and activities of companies around ESG. Because you might be looking at a company that is applying the GRI standard. And then you also have another company that you're also investing in that is around the same sector, that you're also tracking for performance, that is applying the SASB standards. And so all of these things created some form of distortion just in terms of what is the best form of measuring performance for companies in certain sector. What's the best form of measuring performance for SMEs. We've talked about SMEs. Can an SME really apply in totality the GRI or the SASB standards? And in truth, does it have the resources, financial, you know, in order to be able to apply all of these standards? How does it choose which of these standards best suits it and things like that? So all of these things were going on. And so again, we found out that global trends began to move towards a recognition that regulation had to set in, and not just voluntary regulation, but mandatory regulation. Before now, and you will see it when I go to subsequent slides, various countries, various jurisdictions, and even Nigeria itself introduced various regulations that were not mandatory, but rather voluntary, in terms of trying to give guidance to companies in terms of just their reporting and application and implementation of the standards. But even then, we saw that there were some certain issues that arose as a result of it. So you can see that, no, sorry, go back to the other slide. So I just wanted to first point out that in terms of regulation, you could see that now we have an European Union taxonomy. We have, you know, the International Sustainability Standards itself. You also have the corporate sustainability standards, and you even have the United States coming up with its own regulation now. And so we'll now do a deeper dive in terms of these regulations. So first of all, just to talk about the Paris Agreement, we can go to the next slide. To talk about the Paris Agreement is something that we know very well, but basically this Paris Agreement, no, sorry, go back to the Paris Agreement, yes. So this Paris Agreement was agreed upon in 2015 at the COP21, and this was really seen as a breakthrough moment for the world, as it were, because countries came together to agree that really the climate situation was an issue, and that we had to adopt as a country, as a globe, various measures that would help in terms of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and financing. And some of those decisions that were taken was, first of all, around reducing global greenhouse emissions to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and also countries jointly trying to pursue efforts to limit those pre-industrial levels to just 1.5 degrees Celsius. It was also agreed that we would have a form of collective reporting that would happen as a result of that by the various countries. And off the back of these commitments being made, that countries would then be able to access financing. And the previous speaker has talked about some of the sustainable financing that has arisen as a result of those decisions that we're taking. Now, if you go to the next slide, the previous speaker has spoken on the SDG goals. So what I will just focus on is the principle for responsible investing, which were some of the global standards and global goals that arose. And this is something that was that came into being as a result of investors. Now, global investors that have an AUM of 110 trillion with 3,900 signatories. These are the people who came up with this principle for responsible investments. And the reason was they decided that one of the ways by which they could encourage global recognition of the importance of ESG and the implementation of ESG was to have investors, the global big investors, come together and decide on certain principles, basically 6 principles around what would form the basis of their investment decisions. And that once this formed the basis of their investment decisions, it would ensure that companies across the globe would begin to recognize the importance of ESG and begin to implement them as a whole. And some of those things are around the fact that they would be active owners and incorporate ESG issues into the ownership policies and practices. They would ensure that there will be appropriate disclosure on ESG issues by the entities that they were investing in. And this is one of the reasons why you saw that a lot of companies began to have sustainability reporting. And it was a result of these types of requirements that investors had around that area. Now we go into the next slide, which now looks into the legislations that have arisen as a result of it. So first of all, you see that some of the frameworks I talked about, the Global Reporting Initiative. Now, this is one of the most popular frameworks that exist today. And that's because it was one of the very first sets to be introduced, and they were quite bullish in terms of their implementation. And what this standards has is that it actually has two sets of things that it's measuring. You first of all have universal, and you also have the topic-specific standards. The universal standards looks at general business disclosures and management approaches, while the topic-specific standards looks at the economic, environment, and social disclosures. And one of the things that it does is that it requires companies that when they are coming up with these issues and with these measurements and with these metrics, they apply the double materiality assessment in terms of how it affects and impacts them as a business and how their own business impacts upon the community and the environment and all of those things. Then you have the Carbon Disclosure Project. And this is a non-for-profit charity that focuses on disclosures around climate change, water security, and deforestation and biodiversity. Basically, asking a company to disclose all the risks and opportunities that it has recognized and implemented in terms of this area. And then you also have the TCFD, which is also around the climate. But you know, as we begin to go through this, you can see that these are a lot of frameworks that were in place. And so different companies were applying it differently. We can go to the next slide. So now you see here a breakdown of some of the areas in which these frameworks applied. So you can see, for example, that GRI applied to all stakeholders. So all stakeholders could actually make use of their reporting framework. So any company that applied the GRI standards in terms of implementation and in terms of reporting, the data and the way in which it was being reported was something that all various stakeholders, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a regulator, you could actually be able to access and use that information very well. For the SASB standards, you will see that it was more investor focused. And so for those that were applying the SASB standards, investors were able to better appreciate and use these standards in terms of making investment decisions, whether to invest, whether to pull out, whether to increase investments and things like that. Now, other two things to note in terms of the GRI standards as well as the SASB standards is that they also had guidelines that were industry specific, which means that they had standards that whether you're in the manufacturing sector or you're in the oil and gas sector, or you're in the coal sector, you're in the agricultural sector, you're in the utility sector, they basically had frameworks which for companies across those various sectors, whether you're in the financial sector as well. And so you could use those sectors and tailor them in terms of what is applicable to your business, not from a template perspective to say, oh, just filling in a box, but in terms of saying that if you're in this sector, these are the kind of issues that arise as a result of you being in this sector. And so how do those particular issues fit into your business model, and the issues that you are facing and you will face in terms of the future. You also see that we had the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, which was basically for all stakeholders, and it encouraged companies in terms of reporting around things they were doing around climate and natural capital information. I've already talked to what the CDP reported, and I've also talked about the Integrated Reporting Council. Now, what the Integrated Reporting Council was trying to encourage was a form of integrated reporting. Remember, I said that as a result of these frameworks that came into being, what you had is that companies would have their audited financial statements, and they would issue their audited reports separately, and then they would issue some form of sustainability reporting documents that would talk about the things that they were doing around sustainability reporting. And even in terms of how they were reporting it in terms of that sustainability report, it was not necessarily from a risk and opportunities perspective. It was not also from a financial perspective per se. And some companies were not actually even measuring and setting targets for themselves in terms of, for example, carbon emissions, or even in terms of human capital development. None of those things were actually being reported in terms of those sustainability reports they were issuing out. And so one of the things that the Integrated Reporting Initiative was trying to do was to try and ensure that people were actually integrating their sustainability reporting with their audited financial reports and treating it as vital financial information that was needed in terms of people to be able to make business decisions, and for regulators to actually understand whether or not you were actually implementing and applying these things. And that kind of integrated financial reporting actually helps to ensure that helps to reduce form of greenwashing, because clearly it's based on financial information. They are setting targets that are measurable, and people can actually track those targets as it were. So let's go to the next slide.
Hi, Dr. Irene. So we're actually really short on time. So
yes, so let me just focus on the regulations now. So I'll just focus on the regulations now. So like we said, there is now standardization. And so I think the important thing for people to note is that there is now standardization. You know, a lot of people were talking about where there is now standardization. So whether you're talking about the European Union or you're talking about the United States, even in China right now, they are working on introducing legislations around ESG for companies operating. So now there's standardization, and here in Nigeria, we're not left behind. So for European Union, they introduced their legislation in 2023, and we should note something here, that this legislation that's introduced by the EU actually affects companies that are not operating in the EU. And whether or not you're operating in the EU or you're a subsidiary of a company operating in the EU, these standards, this regulation they've introduced affects you, because what the EU regulation says is that there are companies that are subject to this regulation will be reporting on various things around ESG, around climate, not just with respect to their companies and their subsidiaries, but also those operating in their value chain, which means if you are one of their suppliers of products, if you are one of their franchise holders, if you are one of their distributors, you are within the supply chain and you are within the value chain of that EU company, and so it affects. And already it has started trickling into Nigeria, and some of our companies in Nigeria are now affected by this. United States has also introduced regulation, but I want to go into the next slide to quickly talk about Nigeria, which is very, very critical. So please just go into the next slide. Let me quickly talk on Nigeria. So with respect to Nigeria, we're happy to announce, we can go back, we can pass the slides, because this was just talking about some of the legislations that had been before now. But the critical legislation I want to focus on is the IFRS S1 and S2. So in June 2023, the International Sustainability Standards, as well as the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria and the NGX Regulation Limited, they launched the adoption of the ISSB's first two IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, which are known as S1 and S2. S2 deals with the general requirements for disclosure of sustainability related in financial information, while S2 deals with your climate related disclosures and information. And what the sustainability, this S1 and S2, what it now requires is that going forward from a certain time frame, which I'll quickly disclose, companies are now meant to be reporting, having an integrated form of reporting. And so your sustainability related information, your climate related information will now form part of your audited financial reports going forward. And that is very critical for us to note. And in terms of that information, when you are reporting that information, you are not just reporting about your company, but you are also reporting about your business model and your value chain. So the same thing with what has happened in the European Union has also happened in Nigeria now. So value chain. And when we talk about value chain, it means it is hitting the SMEs as well. The SMEs are now being hit because they form part of the value chain of all the companies in Nigeria, whether from you're an SME in a bank, for a bank, and you're accessing finance from the bank, whether you're an SME that is a distributor, whether you're an SME that is a supplier, whether you're an SME that is into logistics, this now affects you because you are part of that value chain. Now, Nigeria has adopted a phased approach, so it's important to note that, and so that phased approach is going to allow a lot of companies and SMEs to get prepared for the mandatory timeline that would happen. Please just quickly go to the next slides. I'll just close in terms of this phased approach so that we understand. So the early adopters are those who intend to be reporting, have this integrated reporting effective from January 1st, 2024 reporting period. So beginning on or after January 1, 2024. These are for the early adopters. So what this means is that it's not yet mandatory, but there are some people, and we already have some companies who are working with the FRCN and who have agreed to be early adopters. And so in terms of their financial reports that we'll be seeing for this year, as well as for even last year, we're going to be seeing them adopting this integrated reporting that discloses all of this information. Now, the voluntary adopters are those who will start adopting for the financial period of 1st January 2024 up till 31st December 2027. So those are voluntary adopters, which means anyone can decide and say, I will start doing an integrated reporting that would include the S1 and the S2 for this period of time. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the mandatory reporting period for companies going forward, and those companies are the companies that would have this mandatory reporting period, and that is from 1st January 2028 accounting period. So we still have, I would say, like 4 years. We are looking at 4 years for it to become mandatory, and to be mandatory for all those entities which are listed on any recognized exchange, which may not be listed, but they are regulated, public limited companies, private companies that are holding companies of public or regulated entities, concession entities, and privatized entities in which the government retains an interest. So all of these companies from 1st January 2028 financial reporting period, it will be mandatory for them to comply with this. For SMEs, that mandatory reporting period will be from 1st January 2030. Now, but let us note something. So if you are an SME and you are part of the supply chain or the value chain of companies which are either early adopters, voluntary adopters, or mandatory adopters, you would have to already have started reporting, because your information is going to feed into their own information. And so SMEs should not sit and think, oh, because it's 2030, I still have time. You basically do not really have time, because if you are unable to work with the companies that you are in their value chain to ensure that they are able to meet their own reporting requirements, you may find out that you'll be removed from the value chain or the supply chain of that company, and they will look to other people that are able, or to other companies or SMEs that are able to meet those requirements. And so when the earlier speaker talked about competitive edge, this can be a competitive edge for SMEs in terms of being able to say, I can actually meet your reporting requirements. For government entities, the timeline has not been set yet, and it's basically going to be subject to when the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board introduces its own standards. I'll just quickly take the next slide that just shows critical key things to note in terms of the report, and then I'll end there. So you can see what are the things to note, whether from the European Union legislation or from the S1 and S2 that has now been made mandatory. I talked about it, integrated reporting now. You'll be reporting on your related risks and opportunities as a company, and to form part of your audited financial statements. Secondly, those information around your sustainability disclosures and your climate-related disclosures have to be assured, have to be verified. So before the era of companies reporting this information without assurance and verification has ended. The other thing to note is that you also have to be reporting on your scope 3 emissions, and that's why I talked about your value chain. SMEs and those within the value chain, you form part of the scope 3, and they have to be reporting on that now. And then the double materiality that was talked about by the second speaker, which is basically when you're talking about assessing your risks and your opportunities, you're looking at the external facing and internal facing, how my business affects the external people and how the external factors affect me. So that in a nutshell is all about the regulatory landscape. I am so sorry for the delay, because I have too many things that I wanted to discuss around drilling down into S1 and S2 itself, and showing you how a lot of the frameworks have now been integrated into the IFRS standards, but I don't have enough time. So thank you very much, and I hope you were able to get some things from this. Back to you, Godfrey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irene. Thank you for this really, I would say, packed session. I know that we still have quite a number of slides to go, but then we have to cut it short here. And this is why this is the ESG series, because we understand that the knowledge that needs to be shared, the insights that we need to share are just enormous, and things keep changing. We can see some of the standards that have just been set last year, so things keep changing. So we'll keep the conversation going. We unfortunately don't have time to take questions now, but if you still have questions, you can drop them in the chat box while we introduce the next speaker, and then we'll take all the other questions. So our final speaker for the day is Madam Eunice Sampson, who is a partner for climate change and sustainability services at Ernst & Young West Africa. Madam Eunice has powered an impactful corporate social responsibility and sustainability practice for 2 decades. In 2018, she joined Dangote Cement PLC, Africa's leading cement manufacturer, as general manager and group head sustainability, where she actively supported the brand in its goal to achieve a strong alignment between financial and non-financial performance. She has been a firm advocate for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and she has a career that spans the financial sector as head of CSR and sustainability at Zenith Bank, where she puts in over 15 years supporting the brand to build a culture of proactive environmental and social risk management. So once again, can we just give a round of applause as we welcome Madam Eunice Sampson? I can't see a virtual.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. And okay, thank you, everyone. Good morning. It's been a very, very interesting session. Confirm you can hear me, please.
Yes, we can hear you, Madam Eunice, loud and clear. We can see you as well.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, great. So I've really enjoyed this session, and it's no wonder anytime sustainability is being discussed, it is always very captivating. And like I like to put it, it's also very addictive because it is about everything that concerns you and I, right? This is not about just profit, corporate performance, and those traditional discussions. This is about our future. This is about the future of our children and generations unborn. It is something that all of us should take personal because it affects you now, and it has the potential to also affect future generations. On that note, I want to say, some of the things I've been hearing very excellent speakers talk about today. First of all, let me start by saying that my role is the easiest here today. I'm supposed to just give a synopsis of what I have heard the speakers say, and then, give some advice to all of us that are participating today. As someone like myself that has been in industry practice for very many years, and now I'm a consultant, I would say that I'm in a very good position to summarize all that have been said today, and not just to summarize, but also to give us some key takeaways from this session that will support us as we go back to our different organizations to entrench leading sustainability practices. So first of all, let me start by saying what I've heard the speakers say today. I heard Abibola Olufore saying that ESG integration helps future-proof your business, and take note of that. Helps future-proof your business and make it future-ready and relevant for today and future generations. Isn't that amazing? I also heard her say that funding is available for businesses that are sustainable. Take note, there are ESG in trillions of dollars that are out there put aside to fund sustainable projects and invest and initiatives. But there are ESG performance conditions that need to be met. Is this not another good reason why we need to integrate ESG into businesses going forward, right? So, and she also mentioned that collective ESG integration helps build a more sustainable, inclusive, and equitable world. So when Company A adopts ESG integration, Company B does the same, Institution C does the same. Collectively, we are able to build, what we say in EY, a better working world. And then I heard Mary Lane also talk a lot about, what should be, the expectations from businesses that adopt leading sustainability and ESG practices. She took us through some of the frequently asked questions and reiterated that sustainability and ESG is a very broad concept. However, she underscored the need to carry out a materiality assessment as a critical part of ESG integration. And why is materiality assessment very important? It is important because sustainability is extremely very broad. Like I put it, sustainability is about anything and everything that can make or break a business or institution. So it's very broad, from the social pillar to the governance pillar to the environmental pillar to the economic pillar. and so many subtopics on, under each of them. The question you want to ask yourself as you live here today is, are all of these topics and subtopics and subtopics under sustainability and ESG relevant to my own business? The question is very relevant, and the answer is no. So that is why it is important that you carry out a materiality assessment to determine which of this universe of issues in sustainability are important to you, so that you know where to put your priorities, you know where to intensify your efforts, and by so doing, you are avoiding a situation whereby you adopt a one-cap-fits-all approach. The sustainability issues that are relevant to a bank may not be relevant to an oil and gas company. The ones that are relevant to an oil and gas company may not be relevant to a telecoms company. So we need to understand, those topics that are material to us and put our efforts into improving our performance around those very relevant topics. So that is one take home for us today. Take note that if you see company A adopting a particular sustainable business model, doesn't mean that you should just replicate what that business is doing. Instead, identify yourself as a business. Where do you play? Who are your stakeholders? Who are those critical, people and institutions out there that are interested in what you do? Who are your target audience, right? What is your line of business? Which sector do you play in? So these are the topics that will, these are the issues that will not determine the relevant topics that you adopt, that you set targets and KPIs on, that you measure your performance on, and so on. So Mary also mentioned the need to measure performance as a way of tracking progress. And this is really, really very, very important, because like she did say, if you do not measure where you are not able to tell whether you are making progress or whether you are retrogressing. So these are some of the key points we must take away from today's webinar. And she talked about the importance of measuring impact from a double materiality perspective. You need to know the impact your business is having on the environment and the society. And you also need to understand the impact that the environment, climate change, and associated topics are having on your own business, so that you know how to safeguard yourself, to put all the mitigation measures in place to make sure that you do not fall victim of climate change. That instead, you're able to leverage the problem and challenge of climate change to innovate your business and leap to the next level that will keep your business sustainable. And then Dr. Irene spoke about the emerging regulations and evolving sustainability reporting frameworks, which is a very, very important topic today. And she stressed why it is important to harmonize the universe of reporting standards to ensure standardization and to improve the value that stakeholders and users of sustainability reports actually derive from sustainability reporting. She also stressed the big role that regulations could play in enhancing this standardization and the value that reporting could create, to sustainability practice and also for all stakeholders. And very importantly, she talked about the new sustainability reporting standards that has just been introduced by the ISSB, that is the IFRS S1 and S2. Actually, that is a full day discussion, but I'm glad she did good justice to it, telling us about how Nigeria has been one of the first countries in the world to have adopted this standard, and how this adoption would, ensure that it is no longer business as usual in reporting, because now sustainability reporting is going to be as important as financial reporting. So please take note, and also take note of the fact that IFRS, which is the standard bearer for financial reporting, is now also the standard bearer for this new sustainability reporting standard. So take note that when you go back, you tell everybody, right? Your leadership, especially your peers, let them know that going forward, sustainability is no longer a nice to have. Sustainability reporting is not just about ticking the box, it's now a regulatory issue. So that said, because of time, I will just quickly tell us as I want to assume that a lot of us here are in the sustainability function, right? One way or the other. So one of the challenges I have faced in the course of my sustainability career, spanning like 2 decades now, one of the biggest hurdles a sustainability professional will face, even in this new dispensation, is making a business case for sustainability. Because businesses are in business to make profits. So when you come to them with ideas that they do not believe in, that you are not able to make a strong business case for, you are on your own, right? It's like pushing a mountain. You are not able to make any progress. And yet you have KPIs that you need to deliver on. So this is one of the biggest dilemmas that sustainability professionals and practitioners face. You are given a mandate, but you struggle to deliver on that mandate because you don't know how to make a business case. If your CEO or your board chairman stops you in an elevator and says, Jude or Mary, Jane, this sustainability you are branding everywhere, tell me what is the need for me? How does it support the growth of my business? How will it take this business from point A to point B? Now, these are some of the things you need to tell your boss, your decision maker, to enable them buy into your sustainability agenda. Number one, tell them what, I think it was Abibola that mentioned it. Tell them that there are trillions of dollars heaped somewhere waiting for sustainable projects and initiatives for it to be invested in. But you cannot tap into this huge reservoir of funds if you do not meet ESG performance criteria. Let them know. And this fund has no boundary. So long as you are able, you know where to approach them, number one, which is not a problem. And also, you know the conditions precedent. Then you can begin to put your house in order, sustainability speaking, and begin to put in place those structures that will enable you qualify for these funds. And also let them know that the business must integrate a culture of sustainability to be able to leverage the huge, sustainable finance out there waiting for good sustainable projects to invest in. So let them know that they can have easy access to capital and investments, that will help them diversify their business and possibly come into new business lines that have been thrown up by this problem of climate change, right? And also tell them that they are able to better manage their sustainability related risk when they do the right things. And I do say during my trainings that businesses fold up, businesses fail, not because of financial issues, not because they are not making profit, not because their assets become eroded. Businesses fail because of structural, environmental, social, and governance issues that were poorly addressed. And gradually, these ESG issues begin to eat into the fabrics of the foundation of the business. And then they begin to lose their reputational capital. They begin to lose their customer base. They begin to lose the confidence of their investors. Everybody begins to withdraw from the business, and gradually the business begins to crumble. So when businesses fail, financial failures and all of that are the symptoms. The real causes of business failure, and go and do your research after this webinar, the real causes of business failure stems from poorly managed ESG issues. Governance, for example, poor governance. Social issues, for example, you see businesses that lose their social license to operate in the communities where they operate, and every day you go to the front of their building, you see community youths carrying placards saying this business must, take their bags and leave their community. Those are ESG related issues. So tell your bosses that these are some of the things you learned during this very important webinar, and also tell them the importance of regulatory compliance. We've seen instances of Nigerian businesses that have been slammed with, fines that are enough if they pay them to make them completely run out of business. But when you imbibe leading ESG practices, you are able to remain regulatorily compliant. And as speakers have said today that a lot of regulations are coming up. Sustainability is not a regulated issue, and a good reason why all of us should begin to take it very, very seriously. And another reason, another business case you can tell your bosses, enhanced reputation. The fact is that studies have shown that businesses that produce or service sustainably are even able to gain premium, even if they charge a bit higher than their competitors, because the consumers and the end users know that, you know, these products were produced sustainably, these services are being delivered sustainably. They are willing to pay that extra amount to be able to buy those products and services. Is this not another reason why, you know, sustainability integration is now a must? And then, of course, customer loyalty, which is related to enhanced reputation. When you have goodwill among the public, you begin to enhance your market share. People just love your brand. They want to patronize you. They can never see anything wrong, you know, in the way you do business, because you have proven and you are certified to be a sustainable business. And of course, leveraging the different huge opportunities that have come up. New sectors, thanks to sustainability and climate change, so many new sectors, so many new industries are coming up. Why don't you diversify your business and leverage those new opportunities and take advantage of the early comer advantage? For example, the renewable energy space, the recycling space, sustainable agriculture space, so many opportunities that are coming up, e-mobility, so many opportunities that are coming up that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we never heard of EVs, electronic vehicles, but thanks to climate change and sustainability, all of these issues have come up. And I will want to match my break, because when it comes to sustainability discussions, you know, I can talk all day. So I want to match my break at this time. And Godfrey, if you can let us know if we still have time to take any questions. I see some hands
Thank
up.
you. Yes, thank you so much, Madam Eunice. Unfortunately, we are already 21 minutes above time, and we sincerely apologize for the technical glitches that made us overshoot for time. So we unfortunately would not be able to take questions here now, but I am going to leave the chat open. I know we still have some of the speakers in the room, so they can respond to some of the questions that they can. But when we are sending the recordings, we'll also try to share as many resources as possible that we can. And of course, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, so it doesn't just end here. We know it has been an interesting conversation. Nothing could be a better indicator of that than the fact that we still have about 223 people in the room. So we really thank every single person for joining. We thank our speakers for taking out the time. And just to wrap up, I am going to share my screen one last time. So I know a couple of people asked questions the chat box around the physical session and other things around someone is asking when the next session is going to be. So I'm just going to speak to the physical session that we have coming up in July. When we started, I mentioned that this ESG series is an offshoot from our annual convening called the Africa Social Impact Summit, where we had the first ESG roundtable. And we're going to be having the third edition of the Africa Social Impact Summit coming up in July from July 25th to 26th, 2024. And we're going to once again be having an ESG roundtable, and we're going to be bringing more experts to speak to the issues, to answer most of our questions, and provide more insights and keep guiding us. So if you want to be part of that physical session alongside other professionals, please register at www.theimpactsummit.org, and we'll look forward to welcoming you in July. Now, without further ado, I just want to thank our speakers once again. I want to thank Ms. Abimbola Olufere of the UNIDO-ITPO Nigeria. I want to thank Mrs. Marilyn Obaisos Osuala of PwC Nigeria. I want to thank Dr. Irene Robinson, and of course, Madam Eunice Sampson. And I also want to thank the CEO of the Sterling One Foundation and the team at Sterling One Foundation, as well as our partners, PwC Nigeria, the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, Sterling Bank, the NGX Group, LBS Sustainability Center, and of course, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So like I mentioned, the slides and the recording will be shared to all participants via the email that they registered, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you. So once again, thank you everyone for joining, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.